So, apologies that this part of the presentation is going to be in English. But I think I understand from my colleagues that you have already received this presentation in German with all the links that we are going to look at today. So please, maybe at the same time that I speak, you may be referring to your own presentation in German. Okay. And as you know, after this session, we will also have some time for recap and to answer to further questions. So let's move on. We are going to look at available tools to build a due diligence system and also to identify applicable legislation at the country and country level risks and how to cross-check information that our suppliers have provided from our supply chain. And in terms of available tools to build a due diligence system, we at Preferred by Nature, we have as part of our legal source program, a set of different templates, guides that you may use. Well, the first important tool that you may use is the legal source standard, which, as you know, is not necessarily a means to certification. You may read a standard, and it also includes Annexes 1 and 2, very useful to understand what is a due diligence system, what are the different elements a due diligence system should include, but also will help us do the assessment at the forest and the supply chain level. Okay, then complementing this legal source standard, we also have a due diligence toolkit, which is freely available. I will show you now how to access it. And there's where we include a lot of templates, guidance, procedures, etc. We have an open source policy at Preferred by Nature, so all these documents that I'm going to show you are going to be freely available. It's just a website and no need to register for most of the part. To download the due diligence toolkit, it's just a matter of providing your email address. So this toolkit is available in the Sourcing Hub webpage. You will have the link in the presentation. Otherwise, if you have problems accessing it, let us know and we will send you the link again, okay? There are different documents. They all start by DD, due diligence. And what you can do is download them all. You can download the toolkit, and that includes the full package of different documents to implement a due diligence system. So, guidance documents. We would have a due diligence guidance. Interesting. It's going to be providing probably the information we are talking about all day today. It will be included in that kind of manual. We also have due diligence for forest managers, so not just for the importers, and then risk specification guidelines on how to, if we need to really assess the risk at the forest level ourselves. And I will show you, usually that's not the case. Usually there are already other people who has assessed the risk at the forest level in most countries. But if we really need to do that ourselves, then we have guidelines to do that. Then we also have templates on how that you may use to implement your due diligence system. We have templates for the manual or the procedures. We have templates to write a legal sourcing policy. We have Excel data sheets that will help you obtain information from the supply chain. So those are really supplier questionnaires. We have a letter that you may use and adapt to inform your suppliers on why do you need that information you're asking for. Remember, you will need to have access to a lot of information, to probably all the links in the supply chain back to the forest. So we have a letter to explain suppliers why you need to do that and why they should cooperate, and then the templates where they can fill and provide that kind of information. We have a risk identification checklist, and just for your information, this is the one we use most ourselves at Preferred by Nature when we do risk assessments. It's basically the different kinds of specific questions that we will try to answer when doing a risk assessment of a supply chain. So we have all the documents we need. Can we prove the supply chain based on sales documentation? Are there risks at the origin level? Can they be mitigated, etc.? So it's a very comprehensive checklist that you can use, and will help you first identify the risk and specify risks if there are, and potentially mitigate them. Then we have a certification scheme evaluation template. As you know, certification is not a green lane for the EUTR, so different certifications may provide different levels of guarantee. So this is a template that will help you evaluate a specific certification system. For your information, in Preferred by Nature, we have already done this benchmarking ourselves for the FSC and the PFC system, and we are currently working on updating them. So we are updating PFC and PFC endorsed schemes compared to the EUTR, FSC, including control wood compared to the EUTR, but also OLB certification, Origine Légale du Bois from Bureau Veritas, ISO certification, and SPP. And the idea is that we will have these reports again freely available for everybody to use, where you will see if there's any gap in those certification systems compared to the EUTR. If you're using a certification system that is not one of those that I just mentioned, then that's when you would need to use this kind of template DD13. We also provide a template for supplier audits, DD14, so that will help you in case you identify the risk and the mitigation option you're going to implement is going on site, then that will help you as a guidelines, as a check and a checklist. And a product statement. So I invite you to check all those tools from our toolkit. If you don't have a due diligence system in place, start with the guidelines and then try to adapt the procedures to your reality and all the templates. Everything, of course, should be adapted to your own reality. Okay. Other things or other tools we can use to assess the risk of our supply chains is maybe you may work with a monitoring organization such as Preferred by Nature or Conlenio or others, that they will provide you their tools that they have, their guidelines, and they will be more or less the middleman between you and the competent authority when trying to provide information. Just for your information, of course, Preferred by Nature is a monitoring organization, and the legal substandard and the associated toolkit are the tools that we use. Then there are dedicated IT systems out there that are specifically designed to map supply chains, handle and record risk assessments. This is useful for very big companies that have many supply chains, or for example, retailers that are far away from the forest level. Then they may use this kind of IT systems because it's easier and it's an interface that is directly with the supplier without necessarily sending out Excel-based questionnaires, compiling the information, and so on. And it allows also to upload supporting documentation and potentially to do the risk assessment and the risk mitigation actions in the system itself. So there are a few IT companies out there already offering this kind of due diligence IT-based systems. But again, you don't need to buy this kind of software. There's already, like, Excel databases work very well. So it depends on the scope of your company. And of course, you should evaluate the supply chains seriously. So you may even have internal resources to do that. So you should train these resources, make sure they are competent, or you may work with an external organization to help you with those risk assessments. So in terms of doing a risk assessment, what are the kind of information that we need? Well, the first question is, are there risks in the country of harvest of my material? Okay, so those are something that we need to assess in different kinds of legality risks. So when we talk about legality, there are 5 categories actually. So we have the legal right to harvest and all the legislation that could include that. Legislation related to taxes and fees. The legislation related to timber harvesting activities, so for example, health and safety, legal employment. Legislation that would include third parties' rights, right? So local communities, indigenous peoples, and legislation that includes trade and transport. So we need to see in the country of harvest that we are looking at, what are the legislations to cover all those categories, and is it good enough? The second question is, okay, there's legislation, but is there a risk that it's not properly enforced? Is there a risk that the legislation exists, but actually the country is so corrupt that you may just harvest a forest and pay for the harvesting fee and a bribe, and it settles, right? So that's another consideration that you have. So it's the likelihood of non-compliance for each legal subcategory. So this is quite challenging. Okay, so this is quite challenging, but luckily we have some resources out there that we can use. So I'm going to show you the one that we use most, of course, because we developed it as part of a live program, which is the Preferred by Nature Sourcing Hub. Okay, we have a sourcing hub. What I'm going to do is access to the sourcing hub now with you. If there's any problem while accessing it, please, colleagues, shout. But it's a freely available website. And let me show you how it works. I think you should be seeing my screen right now, right?
Yes, we see it.
Perfect, thank you. So I am in the Sourcing Hub website, so preparedbynature.org/sourcing hub. And we actually have risk assessment not just for timber. We're talking about due diligence of all of the main commodities that are related to forest degradation and deforestation. So right now we have risk assessments for timber, for beef, for soy, and for palm oil. There may be more coming in the future. Right now, let's focus on timber. So we would click on this commodity. And what we will see is a map of the world. Okay.
Sorry,
yes.
Do you have some background noise or something? It's getting a bit noisy in your background, or is it somewhere else?
Okay, let me try to fix that. Okay, let me see, let me come back. So you see my screen, right? I'm scrolling down. So you see a map of the world with different colors, which are more or less like a traffic light system. The redder the color, the higher the risk, and the greener, the lower the risk. So we can select any of the countries that are here. The countries in green, unfortunately, is because we don't have a risk assessment in place yet. Okay. This covers 62 countries already, which is 80% of the European imports of timber in volume. So it should already give you a lot of information. Otherwise, after this, I will show you other potential sources of information you may use. So let's say that we are sourcing from China. And let's see what's the risk profile for China. So I click on the country. And here I have an overview about the forestry situation in China, okay? And just a summary. It's specified risk for 5 subcategories, low risk for 11, and blah, blah, blah. Here you already have a lot of good information that you may use in that checklist when you were doing the risk assessment, which is the Corruption Perception Index, updated for the 2020 figures. If there are bans or restrictions at the country level, and if there are, where and for what species, for example, or what type of timber product, if there's armed conflict, if there are cited species in the country and which ones, and some statistics on certification and availability. The interesting part that you may look at is the risk assessment. And here's where you have the summary. Okay, so these are the categories I just showed you. When we talk about legal legislation, we have the legal rights to harvest, taxes and fees, timber harvesting activities, trade and transport, and traceability. For each of those, we have the summary of are there risks in that country. So here we see, yes, there's some risk, but it applies to these provinces and only to plantation species. Okay, so that's also interesting information you may obtain from your supply chain. We are talking from a country that has already risk. It will be necessary to go to the subnational level. So are we talking about which province are we talking about, or which state if we're talking about the United States, things like that. And also usually there will be different levels of risk if we talk about plantation versus natural forests, or maybe smallholders versus government-owned forests. Okay, so that kind of information, as much as information as you can obtain, please do, and then it will help you to see if any of these risks are really applicable to your own supply chain or not. Okay, so here we have all these risks, and once we have identified the risks that apply to my specific supply chain, then we will need to implement mitigation actions. And this website already provides information on possible mitigation options. Okay, so well, first is usually the best is to source certified materials, especially from countries where there could be risk of mixing, such as China or Vietnam, but of course this is not always available. So for non-certified material, then we have a lot more information. China is actually a good example because it's quite complete in the sourcing hub. Not all the countries has this level of details, but the advantage with China is that we have a risk mitigation guide that gives you a more detailed overview of the risk and how to mitigate them. Okay, so let's look at it just very quickly. And here you have what I just mentioned, information on what kind of information you should obtain from your supply chain to be able to minimize the risk or to really pinpoint the risk to your situation. So is it a natural forest, a protected forest, a plantation, etc. And then we have the risk and then potential mitigation actions. So what kind of documents you should obtain from your supply chain to check that this risk has been mitigated. So first, tenure certificate, harvest certificate, and valid contracts for supply, etc. If, oh, sorry, this cannot be opened here, but there's, if I come back, if you don't know how harvest permit looks like in China, the advantage is also that we have a document to show you how these documents look like. So let's see if I can access it please from this other link. Here we are. And here it will give you examples of what is a forest tenure certificate. It looks like this. Okay, this is the kind of information you should look at, etc. So again, China is a very complete example and it's going to help you with all this. What is a phytosanitary certificate? Well, let's look at how it would look like and what we need to look at. It would look like something like this. Okay, transportation permit, etc. So all these resources, as I said, are out there for you to use. And it's just a website, so very, very easy to access. And I'm back to the main presentation. Can we see it okay, Michael?
Yes, we see it okay. Everything okay.
Perfect, thank you. So that was the sourcing hub. Again, a lot of information is there already, so I will suggest that that's the first source you use, also because most of the information that I'm going to give you on this next slide is already part of the risk assessments that are included in the sourcing hub. But what happens in the country of origin is not there. So for example, there was parts of Africa that did not appear in the sourcing hub yet. They didn't have a risk assessment. So Other sources of information we may use are the FSC centralized national risk assessments, for the control wood risk assessments. I'm not going to open them, but you have the links already with you, right? So feel free to look at them as we speak. The FAO, the FAO also has a database that lists the applicable forestry legislations in each country. It will not give you, unfortunately, this one does not give you an idea of the risk of not enforcing those laws in the country. The Timber Trade Portal is another source of information. PV Rio, especially for Brazil. The Australian government, because they have also their own regulation for imports, they have country-specific guidelines that importers to Australia must use, but it's very few countries right now, but it should be more and more. So you may have a look at that one. World Resources Institute as well has worked on an open timber portal, which right now includes a lot of information from Africa. So that's, if you're sourcing from Africa, that's a good source of information you may use. Then the APEC Experts Group on Illegal Logging, they also have timber legality guidance, Client Earth, or Chatham House. You may use the sources of information. Just make sure that they address all the EUTR legal categories, okay? Because we just saw there are many. It's not just forest harvesting, it's also trade and transport, third parties' rights, etc. So you may check, you may compare it to our legal source guidelines and see if there's anything else that was missing and that you should obtain the information elsewhere. This is the document that I presented you earlier that I mentioned, and I hope that you don't need to use yourself, but it could happen. There's really not a risk assessment available for a given country. Then the operator must implement and do the risk assessment on their own at the country level. So we have these guidelines, DD09, and it will describe, it will go step by step how to evaluate the risk at the country level. So first, it will be, of course, listing the applicable legislation, who are the legal authorities, what are the legally required documents, and what would be sources of information, risk determination. How to determine if a risk is low or specified or negligible or non-negligible is always the big question. Where do we put the threshold? Okay, so this is not easy, but as a rule, low risk are problems that are temporary, unusual or non-systematic, limited in their impact, effectively controlled by monitoring and enforcement by efficient and effective government agencies. Unspecified risk would affect a wide area or would cause significant damage or continues over a long period of time, indicates the absence or breakdown of enforcement of the legal system, is not corrected or adequately responded when identified, and has a significant negative impact on society, the production of forest products, the forest ecosystem, and the people directly and indirectly affected by the forest operations. Okay, so those were the risks at the forest level and at the trade level. But then we also want to see species risks and validity of our information. So other sources of information to check this kind of supply chain documents or information could be species distribution websites. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example later going live to see how we can determine if the species they declared is really growing in that country. Okay, so that's a way of cross-checking the validity of information and the credibility of my supplier's claims. Also, we can check trade routes. Does it make sense that material is harvested here and then comes here? Is there really a port here that accepts timber from this other country? Those are things that we can check on our own just by going to websites. Document validity when available, so we can go to websites to check if a company has provided a business license. Is it active? Are they up to date with their payments? We can check if an invoice had been really declared to the authorities. all those things sometimes can be checked online. Certification claims, probably you know about this, how to check if a document is really certified or not, and is it valid or not. You would go to the specific certification body website, forest-related documents, etc. So all the information that they give you should be, if we suspect there's a risk, it should be cross-checked. So to check forestry documents from the Congo Basin, we have the Open Timber portal. It will give you a list of the required forestry documents in a given country, from Cameroon, for example, and examples on how they look like. And sometimes, maybe even the company you're sourcing from is in that portal, and World Resources Institute will give you an idea of this is complete, this is not complete, this company is transparent or not. So that's a very good resource of information if you're sourcing from Africa. For species distribution, so as I said, to know if Quercus alba grows in this part of the world, in Eastern Russia, then we can go to these databases. Or to know if Quercus alba is considered an endangered species, or has any other factor to it that would contribute to the risk of illegal logging, then we can check the IUCN Red List and the Global Biodiversity Information Facilities. For trade routes, there are also the FAUSTAT. It will give you, that's usually the one we check, forestry trade flows, so timber harvested in Russia, where does it go in the world and how? And Sustainable Timber Information Exchange, or Chatham House again can give you an idea. Okay, so this is just a very small selection of tools that you may use. Actually, there are others, for example, that we usually check that will help you with shipping. So if a container was loaded in this port and is going to this other port, and you have the packing list, bill of lading, etc., you may check if that was really the case. When did it go out? When did it arrive? What was it containing, etc. So there's a lot of free available information out there that you may use to cross-check the validity and credibility of the supplier declarations. And then we are going to receive documents in other languages. Well, if we don't have the translator in-house, there are a few tricks that you may try to do in-house. So online translation tools, of course, Google Translate, etc. But also now PDF tools include this option of character recognition, so OCR. And it may help you if you're dealing with a document in Chinese, Vietnamese, or Russian, and you just want to be able to read it, just to translate it to your own language. It's not going to help you, of course, interpret if it's valid or not, or legal or not, but at least you will have it translated it, and you may use these available options. Sometimes they are not available with the free version of the PDF, but maybe worth just paying an extra to have all these add-ons. And yeah, I think that is it for this part of the presentation. And now it's 12:30 and we have some time for more questions and for wrapping up.